Dr. Jazz.
I just, the other day
Jazz.
when we started our talk, like I re-listened to basically the records I have of you, and you wrote so many cool tunes, like Thelma's Heart, Chuck's Groove, like, and so many others, and
Okay.
and you
That's
said
fine.
you said the other day you don't consider yourself as a composer, and I kind of want to start here, like,
Yeah, I wish I felt a little bit more confident or proactive about being a composer. It just so happens what am I doing? I'm doing something. I have a gig, and one of the sort of things in all of the requests by the people who hired me was that, well, we encourage you to play original music.
okay,
And I'm like, okay. So I started looking and I listed all the tunes that I've written that I can remember. And I was saying, actually some of these things, and then I had to actually contact my publisher, and I sent them a recording because they have a staff transcriber who had to transcribe my own song. And I said, oh, so I looked at it and said, oh, man, that's kind of nice. The harmony's nice. And because I only studied composition and harmony and all that stuff just to be a better musician, not to be a composer.
hmm.
And I just wanted to know, but I had no plans to utilize whatever skills or whatever training I got. But some of it must have stuck because I was noticing, yeah, this is actually not bad harmony. I mean, for me, better than I thought I could do. So I'm actually thinking now about trying to write more, maybe. If I can get, I mean, I bought I bought a piano, oh man, 15, 20 years ago with telling my wife, well, I want to write more, and I haven't written anything since I bought it. So she's always reminding me, well, look, if you're not going to compose, you need to sell this thing. So I better start writing. So at least that's what I'm going to do.
Oh,
I'm going
beautiful.
to, yeah. I mean, I used to get the urge to do it. Usually I only could write if I had a recording date, or if I
Yeah.
was on somebody else's recording date and they said, well, we want everybody to bring in a song. But generally, I had my own recording dates. I think my first recording date, I may not, I must have had, I had one something I made right on the spot and another one that I had used before. So I always felt kind of embarrassed about having my own recordings without my own compositions. So at least I always had try to have one or two.
Yeah.
And, they're not bad, I mean, really. But I think actually probably I was a better composer than a better arranger because
Hmm.
every time we should
Really?
arrange things, well, I mean, for large ensemble,
Okay.
because I took all the courses and everything. Once again, I just wanted to know more about music. I had no real specific agenda to use information, and uh, and it's been good and it's been helpful. But a few big band charts back in college, I was like, didn't sound exactly how I wanted it to sound, what I thought it was going to sound like. So, but composition is a different thing. You don't have to worry about scoring
Sure.
and whole idea about how you write for moving lines and how you score for moving lines. And I still remember some of the general theories and the general sort of techniques, but I just never did it a lot. You can only become competent in something by doing
Mm.
it. Uh, and uh, and because I didn't write a lot for large ensembles once I got out of college, I just didn't bother with that anymore. But
Mm.
I mean, if I utilized my time better, I could do a lot of things. But I haven't figured that out. I've been retired for about 3 or 4 years, and I've just basically been really relaxing for a long time. So
Which is
after
good.
many,
Which is good also.
it is good. I think we
Yeah.
all deserve some time to doing nothing if we are so inclined. Some people can't do it. My wife has to stay busy. but I can easily not be busy. Actually, I like not be busy. So anyway, I'm still struggling. But yeah, well, thank you for the compliment. And I found one that I recorded in the duo setting, and I just didn't have a lead sheet for it. So by having to do this gig, I sent this stuff to Don Seckler, the Second Floor Music, and then they wrote it out. And I was like, oh man, so I'm gonna start playing it. So maybe that will encourage me to write.
Yeah, you'll have a songbook.
Perhaps.
But is this then
So
also...
you're in Slovenia?
Yeah, I'm in Slovenia, in Europe.
Pardon?
I'm in Slovenia, yeah.
Yeah. I think I knew a couple of people at Berkeley from Slovenia.
Yeah, definitely.
I think I remember I met a few, and I've gotten near Slovenia, but never in the actual country. I was up in that part of Italy. Yeah, I was
with Art? You didn't play with Art, like in Ljubljana, in former Yugoslavia?
I did play in Yugoslavia, but was that Slovenia?
Yeah, and Slovenia was part of Yugoslavia. So, but it depends.
Yeah, but well, I don't remember the city.
Ljubljana, that's the capital.
Yeah, okay, maybe so. I just remembered it was an interesting gig, and it was my first. Oh yeah, that was a gig. Oh wow, that was really crazy. That was a gig. Well, I forgot how we got there. I think probably we took one of the flights was on Aeroflot. That I remember real well because those were some really interesting airplanes. You know, like they had netting for instead of like luggage compartments. It was netting. It really felt like combat duty. It felt like we were going to war or something. And I don't know if that was going from one country into Yugoslavia, but or from Yugoslavia to East Berlin, because I think we went to East Berlin after Yugoslavia, and then we walked through Checkpoint Charlie, which was quite weird. Yeah, I don't remember that circumstance. I remember, but I don't remember the details. I also remember it was pretty messed up because there were young people because they knew we were there in the hotel, and they were allowed to be in the lobby, but it was like guys who wanted to come up and play in the room or to talk about music or to look at my horn. They were really, we can't go to your room.
Wow.
Because it was against the law. They weren't supposed to hang out with Westerners, except in the lobby where probably all of the KGB guys was looking at the same time.
That's terrible.
It was pretty weird. That was East Berlin. That wasn't Yugoslavia. Was pretty relaxed, actually.
We were more open, yeah.
Yeah, Yugoslavia was very relaxed. I remember. I remember it was pretty cool, actually. I mean, it was. I remember it was kind of a nice time, but East Berlin was not. It was a little. It was a little tight, to say the very least. Yeah, it was very strict. And it's funny. I went back to East Berlin. When the wall came down, I was playing in Berlin with Tony Williams, and he said, "Hey man, let's go look at the wall." So the whole band, I think most of us at least, went to go look at the wall, and of course people were selling shit. They were selling fake Soviet artifacts. I mean, they weren't real things, but they had a hustle. They had an industry, selling fake Soviet souvenirs to stupid Westerners and Americans, So it's like business as usual, no matter where you are. It's the same thing. Somebody's got to hustle, and somebody's going to make some money.
Yeah,
but it was interesting to be there. I don't think I've been back to Berlin because I went to Berlin a few times with Art, and but we didn't go to Eastern Europe too much. I think Yugoslavia, East Berlin. I went to Poland later. That was with Tony. Anyway, but it and wait a minute, did I have a recent? Oh yeah, well it wasn't Eastern Europe. I was in the Ukraine.
Really?
About 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah.
Whoa,
yeah.
How was that?
The people were wonderful. They're very lovely. I mean, as it is with most places I've been to, I've always found the people of the countries to be so much nicer than the official face. And you could even say, well, shit, you could say that about America. You know, the people are a lot nicer than the politicians and the people who supposedly represent the country. Those people are usually pretty fucked up, to be honest.
Yeah,
you
true.
know,
It's true.
and that's universal. That doesn't matter if it was Western, Eastern, or Asian, or whatever. That's pretty much always you. I can't think of one real benevolent sort of politician, but I don't know I don't follow politics too much, and because it's bad enough here now.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want to find it as worse someplace else, because it's hard to imagine it could be any worse than what it is here. So yeah. So no matter where I've gone, people in music always has more of a unifying and a uniting sort of aspect to it. I mean, nobody comes out to listen to a jazz concert unless they have some sort of understanding what supposedly it's about, and to some degree, more or less, the history, and it's American, and it's Black Americans initially and originally, but it's kind of a universal language in itself. I mean, Louis Armstrong was probably the world's greatest ambassador for good, period, for good. Louis Armstrong, because he played music, and when he played music, people forgot about all the other bullshit. You know, and that's kind of how music should be anyway, at least in my mind.
Art was like that as well, right? When he toured with Art.
Art was very much like that. Yeah, he could charm anybody. He was one of the great con artists of all times, except he meant it. He wasn't conning people, but he was a really good talker. He was a really good communicator. That's a nice way of putting it. And that was true. And he genuinely loved people. He was a very loving kind of guy in his own way. I mean, he was never not loving, but he's not the kind of guy you don't want to get mad either at the same time. But he was, when he met new people and he was in a new situation, and kids he really loved. And that always brought out the best in him, you know, especially kids, but new people as well, and being in new situations. Always women always made him happy. but yeah, I mean, pretty much everybody's like that. All men are like that anyway. But him maybe a little bit more than the rest of them. But children he loved, and he really liked preaching gospel of jazz, and he did. He always did it. It was always interesting when we did a lot of the gigs we did. We'd been in places where nobody could speak a lick in English, and Art would do these long monologues. And I'd say, Art, no, you know, maybe like 5-10% of the people at best know what you're saying, but he would very passionate talk about jazz. You know, so I mean, you have to love a guy like that. How could you not love a guy like that? You know, he didn't, and I didn't know Louis Armstrong, but Louis was a different kind of person. His warmth and his personality just sort of exuded from him. With Art, that was the case too. Well, everybody knew he must have been he was a party guy. He felt like it. He felt like a guy you could really have a good time with. And but he liked to talk, even if people didn't understand what he was saying. But Art was, man, he changed my mind about a lot of things. Oh, he encouraged, just in his presence, he encouraged all of us to be a little better in terms of how we wanted to present ourselves in a professional or a musical situation, because he was always, he said a few things. The one thing that always kind of stuck with me too, when he was angry at us and he was cursing us out, he did that too, but only in private. He said, you ain't doing anybody any favors by being up here, which means, somebody else could be here just as easy as you. I could get somebody in a minute, and it was true. It was correct. And I said, yeah, he's got something there. It's hard to fight that logic. That's a pretty solid logic right there. Yeah. And it was a great experience for me. It was the first on the road experience, and going to Europe. That's the first time I went to Europe.
When
so
was that, like 80 or 81?
Yeah, it was in the 80s. It started in 1980. And going to a lot of time in the Netherlands, but a lot of time in France as well. Our promoter, our booker in Europe was, well, actually in the record company was a guy named Wim Vick, who was Dutch, and so we spent a lot of time there. And so just I didn't learn any languages, unfortunately, but you learn the people to a certain degree. You know which countries have whatever personalities certain countries have. You pick up on that. Musicians are kind of intuitive about stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's hard to bullshit a musician because they're basically all bullshitters themselves. Yeah. So, but you pick them on who's being honest with you and who may not be. And generally, we always had a great time. And we do 6 weeks of touring, mostly one language in Europe. That's a hard road. I was luckily I was still young. I was 30, and I couldn't do that now.
Oh man,
by any means. But yeah, that was tough one. But I could do it. I mean, it would wear him out, but he would be in, and he would make a big deal about letting us know how strong he was. And he was pretty strong, actually. He was strong until the day he died. That was the guy. He would laugh sometimes and just, about people smack your leg when you're sitting down, like, yeah, and he hit your leg and it felt like he broke it. I was like, oh man. And he didn't mean anything by it. He was just you could look at him and see that he was a strong guy. He was naturally like that. He was old school person. But God bless his soul, man. He was everything. He wasn't just many things. He was pretty much everything you can think. He was that. But by and large, man, he was such a positive force for any and everybody that really knew him on some level. He was a good guy. Good guy.
Did you ever talk about music? Did he ever talk about music with you guys, or like how to play something?
He would tell us sometimes. Yeah, he would tell us about what he thought we could do better. But and not in a bad way. Then sometimes it would be like, it would be angry. But at first he would say, like when you play your ballads, he would say, he would give you little pointers from his perspective. And sometimes he would, and to encourage us to be a little bit more attentive, that's when he would curse. A lot of times it was just theater, he would say, he cursed us out because he wanted us to have more energy. So he would try to put fear in us. And he was good at that. He knew how to read people. He could read an audience, and he certainly could read the band because he was around us a lot. But yeah, he did give us pointers, and he did sort of sometimes say things as examples. He didn't direct it as here's a teaching lesson. He would tell you stories about Chick Webb or about Charlie Parker, about Monk. He loved to talk about the Thelonious Monk. That was his buddy.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, they were close. They supposedly had the same birthday, but I think it's not. I'm not sure if it's really true or not. I think it's close, and Art just made it so. He just said, "Yeah, we have the same birthday." But yeah, I mean, Art. Yeah, man, he was a multifaceted personality. All from good and bad and everything in between. Yeah. And that's what made people love him, I think, because he was everything to everyone, or he could when he wanted. He was basically that. He could read you, and then he knew what he could do and what he could say to you, and give you that smile. He was a character. He was a real jazz character, one of the real ones, yeah, for sure.
The old school, yeah. Like
old school.
Do you remember the first time you played with him? I mean, like, or how you got the gig, actually? Was it an audition?
Well, as James Williams talked me up to Art, and Art was like, well, if he's that good, we need to hear him, And so I got a call in December when I found out that when James found out that David Snider was going to leave the band, James called me and he told Art, this guy, man, you should hire this guy. I mean, he basically talked me into the gig. And then, but you go and do a rehearsal, and you may do a gig. You may last only one gig, maybe 2 gigs, and you're gone. But I went to the rehearsal, and of course, Art wasn't there. So Art never made any rehearsals. He would
Oh.
call rehearsals. Every now and then, if you were in a city that wasn't New York, if you're not at home, then he may show up for a while. But I had a big rehearsal over at his son's house in Manhattan, and I got there, and my first gig with Art, my first time playing was Art the night of the gig, on the gig
Wow.
at McKell's uptown in Harlem, and uptown Manhattan, and that was it, man. Art showed up. I had already rehearsed with the band without Art, and I got there, and then he said, "Cool." That was it.
Short.
Yeah.
Wow.
Cool. You're hired. He's good enough. I know he's going to get better. Something like
That's
that.
great.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. And
It was really like the stories in the movies and shit about jazz.
man, yeah. When you
But
say this now,
he-
that's amazing.
Yeah, and everybody has at least one Art Blakey story, but usually many, according to certain situations, But we all had one, we all had a great experience with Art. I mean, as Mulgrew Miller said, man, we should get on our knees and thank Art Blakey for allowing us, as bad or as inexperienced and unknowing as we were, to play with a guy, a master musician like him, and a master musician in the sense of being a musician that could entertain people and could change people's lives for at least for a moment, just in the way he played and the personality that he exuded from the bandstand. I mean, that's a special thing.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of, it's old school in some ways. It shouldn't be, because it should sort of be like that even for younger guys. Sometimes maybe music gets a little bit too heady and too intellectual. There's nothing, you shouldn't be stupid, but music shouldn't be beyond the concept of, or the experience of the audience. You should give the audience something to grab hold to, then you can bring them along with it, which is one of the Art Blakey's concepts. That's why he played shuffles and played blues a lot, and ballads, and he always wanted to have not, the ballads would be maybe from the standard songbook, not necessarily, but he kind of liked that because he knew that for a lot of people in the audience, they would recognize it, and they would be able to relate whatever it is you're going to do to it. They would be able to relate to it on some level, and it's probably not that many guys anymore who can do that.
Yeah,
there are still a few. Wynton does it in his own way, but it's on a bigger scale and with a larger ensemble. And I think Branford is more like that now too. And there are other guys of my generation, the generation right after me, but maybe it starts to tail off. But it's old, but it's not really. I don't never look at jazz as being old or new.
Definitely.
It's just jazz. It's just different styles and different kinds of jazz. But I don't. When people talk about all that old stuff, granted, when I was younger, I didn't understand how to listen to some of the older forms. But as I got older and experienced and mature, man, I could listen to New Orleans style, man, and love it. And I do. And listen to Louis Armstrong, I just, the other day I was listening to a thing of Sidney Bechet, and it was unbelievably good, man. It was great, man. The big sound and the way his energy and his swing feel. It's just, it's a continuing sort of thing for me. For most people of my generation, we're the old guard now. We're the old guys now, and maybe the guys right after us, the Wintons and the Branfords and the other people. But it's hopefully it'll continue, and that people will have that same sensibility. Somebody, not everybody has to, but some people have it. So you can go and play for a bunch of like senior citizens, and they would have a great time. Go to nursing homes, and people would be patting their feet. That's when I've done that. it's like kind of really nice. You know, old folks are really digging the music. They don't know what the hell is going on, but they like it because it's genuine. It has a beat. It has a swing.
Energy.
It's
Yeah.
wanting to dance to it. You know, that's you know, I didn't start off thinking and feeling that way when I was in my pre-20s, in my 20s, but you know, you get to a certain point where, well, everybody should mature. I would hope. I hope everybody gets an opportunity to mature
Yeah.
because it's a wonderful thing when you're a mature person and you can think in a mature way. But anyway, I'm talking too much now.
No. Please, love to listen to you. But
Yeah. But anyway, so you asked something different.
yeah, well, you threw me the bone there. Like you said, you went with Tony Williams to Poland and to other countries as well in Europe. Like how did you played a couple of years with Art Blakey and then with Tony Williams, with talking about like two of the
Well,
greatest drummers ever.
3 years with Art Blakey and about 6 or 7 with Tony.
Wow.
Tony was a totally different person, but his core values were absolutely the same. Absolutely. But the music was all original because that's why Tony had that band. He wanted to write. Tony wanted to be a film scorer. Tony wanted to write for movies and make a lot of money and not have to travel. Really. At least that was one of his motives anyway. And so we were lucky enough to get in a band that was basically like a laboratory kind of band where he would write tunes, we would play them. Sometimes he would change them, or sometimes he would tell us we weren't playing them right. He did that a lot, and so that in itself was another kind of a situation for me, and for everybody else in the band. Luckily, we had Mulgrew because Tony's theoretical knowledge was really classical.
Yeah.
So even when he wrote songs, he wrote them with a classical nomenclature. So it was like, man, what does he mean by this? I mean, it's like figured bass. And but Mulgrew would break it down to the jazz perspective, which Tony hadn't.
Changes.
I don't know. Yeah, changes and stuff like that. Tony basically was all compositional and counterpoint and stuff like that. And so Mulgrew could break it down. Sometimes you'd hang out with Tony and do it. And Tony could actually write some changes too, but I think Mulgrew helped him out a bit with that. But, you know, Tony always was a guy who was a seeker. So I can't imagine he didn't tap into, you know, Herbie and other guys when he was around them to get more information.
Yes.
But he was studying counterpoint up until the time he started that band. I think he might have stopped then. For about 2 or 3 years with a guy at UCLA. And he was just studying legit, or not, I shouldn't use legit, but traditional counterpoint. And some of his songs were, you know, I could listen. I said, that's probably a homework assignment. And he made it into a song. A lot of his songs were like that. And he was a very, very bright man. He was a very intelligent guy. And he was born intelligent, but he also was a reader and a person who seeked intelligence. He seeked knowledge. He wanted to know about stuff. So if he knew. I went to college, 2 different colleges, Berkeley and a college in Tennessee, and most of the stuff in Tennessee was traditional or so-called classical. But Tony knew more about classical music than I did. He could recognize. We'd be in the car and he only played classical music.
Oh wow!
And then he'd say, "Oh yeah, that's sometimes like shit. I know who that was." I wouldn't know because I just did the theory and the composition courses and the music history course because I was required to. But Tony really wanted to do that stuff. That's what Tony wanted to excel at, and he did. I mean, that he really was a genius, man. He really was. He really was. And a very interesting guy in many ways, man. He was super intense. But we got to be friends on a certain level anyway. We got to be friends. And I you know, sometimes we would talk about stuff and he would sometimes refer to me as a teacher, and not in a negative way. Said, man, this guy works at a college. He was telling somebody else, man, you should study with somebody like that guy. And I was like, no, don't say that, please. And he said the same thing about Mulgrew, although, you know, Mulgrew went to college too, but he left college to go on the road and to play. He Mulgrew lived in Boston for a time. I knew him in Boston.
Oh, really?
When he was just living there, but he didn't stay that long. I think he went from Boston to LA, and then from LA he joined the Duke Ellington band. But that was a great band. That was me, Wallace Roney, Mulgrew Miller, and it was Shawnette Moffett for a while. Then it was Bob Hurst for a while, and then the last bass player was Ira Coleman. That was a wonderful band, and we all meshed. And each band had a somewhat slightly different sound, but basically it was Tony's imprint on the band, on the music. And sometimes when we started taking liberties with the music, and Tony the stuff that he liked, Tony kind of claimed like he wrote it. So he didn't write that. We started doing this. And sometimes we get so carried away trying to be creative with it. He would say, hey, you guys aren't playing it correctly. And then we'd have to go back to the original verse. But it was that kind of thing where we could, there was a certain amount of leeway that we snuck in just so because we're playing a lot. And that happens. Any band is like a living organism. It might start, even going back to Art Blakey's band. Some of the music that was brought into Art's band, like from Bobby Watson or from James Williams, after a while, it had changed without anybody realizing it. And that happened a lot with Tony's stuff too. And it may not be a big thing. It might be a nuance here and there, but all bands, and at least I think so, at least in the bands that I've been in, the music will change on its own without even realizing it, and change for the better. And because as you play it, there's more things you find out about the music you're playing. You know, you find out maybe if we did this, it'd be more effective. And nobody ever talked about it. It just kind of happened that way. That's really the joy of playing in a band for a long time. That's what I feel bad about for a lot of young people, because if they don't get that experience of playing with the same guys or same people for a period of time, and also if you're playing you can do it without playing for an audience, but playing in front of an audience adds another layer and another level of something, reality or nuance, because you're not in a vacuum. You're playing for people, and you check out and see, well, that worked really well. Yeah, maybe we should do more, or things like that, or whatever. And a lot of times things were extemporaneous, and we couldn't even repeat them again. But sometimes a lot of similar things would happen on similar tunes, and there's according who was having a really good night. With Tony, he always played like 100% and then some. But and so did Art Blakey, actually both of them, yeah. But
really
Art Blakey was a idol. Tony Williams idolized Art Blakey. One of the three or four drummers, Max Roach, Art Blakey, Alan Dawson, because he was his teacher, and somebody, and maybe a guy named Jimmy Satano. I don't know if he idolized him, but that was one of Tony's teachers, a guy in Boston, and he was a traditionalist in a lot of ways, even though he was always talking against tradition, especially with Miles, and they were playing such advanced music. But his core values were very traditional. He could play any Philly Joe solo or any way that Philly Joe played behind Miles or Jimmy Cobb. Tony could do all that stuff. He had it in his brain. He could sing almost any solo from any Miles Davis recording. He listened so much. He was just a guy that had a genius level brain, and he was and he was also obsessive. He had an obsessive personality, which helps.
Sure.
So man, I'm just, those two guys and another guy, Kevin Eubanks, are the three band leaders that I worked for that made the biggest difference, and James Williams too, because he kind of was the guy who helped me to even get started. But with Kevin Eubanks, he helped me to not be so regimented about all the things I just talked about, how wonderful they are, but there are other things you can do too. You know, sometimes don't even think about that, because if you've done the preliminary work, if
Yeah.
you listen to the grand masters, that stuff there is there anyway, no matter what you do. So it's a, you know, it's a universe. It's a big universe of music. I wish when I was teaching I could have talked more like this then, but I didn't think about it that much. I was too busy trying to make, you know, deadlines and shit like that and write up reports. and I didn't have a lecture course that I probably could have signed, because I hate to over intellectualize and over philosophize music. I don't like that in particular. There's ways that it makes sense to hear people talking that way, but sometimes when people start talking, it's like, Jesus Christ! I mean, this sounds like, you know, this is not that. Yeah, this isn't really music, is it? What is this I'm talking about? But you know, my life experiences now are kind of a little bit more accessible to me. I remember, and I can articulate how it affected me, because just every now and then I think about, yeah, I kind of, that's what that meant. That's what he meant when he cursed me out. You know, that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's good. It's good. What did I say earlier? It's good to mature.
Yeah.
So
yeah. We hope,
in my maturity, I can look back and draw from stuff, you know?
Yeah.
You know, say la vie.
Yeah.
But that's how life works. I mean, what can you do? But yeah, I've had a wonderful life in music, far beyond anything I would have ever imagined, because I came from a very, very small rural town in Florida before I moved to Miami. And so I came, but even when I first heard jazz in that little town, it was like a trigger went off. Oh, that's it. That's what I like. It wasn't that's what I want to do. There was no way I thought I'd ever been able to do that.
What did you hear?
Well, it was Miles Davis. I found a record store downtown that had Miles Davis, Cannonball Adderley, John Coltrane. My first one was actually Dave Brubeck, because Dave Brubeck was so popular that you could find Dave Brubeck records anywhere. And so that got me going. But when I heard Miles, I was like, oh yeah, well, I like that. I really like that. You know, so it kept building on the different sort of people that I cared for, or that I found an affinity for. The Train and Miles Davis and Philly Joe Jones and Paul Chambers. And I really couldn't hear the level of expertise and the genius behind those guys. I mean, now I can articulate it, but then I just knew I liked it, and it did something for me inside, you know, something like that.
We'll continue with the drummers and go to Roy Haynes and ask you about the track with Hank Jones and Roy Haynes.
Oh, well, that was
a beautiful one, and
that was a James Williams deal there. I think was that my first recording? No, that wasn't my first recording for Francois. But I think James, it may go back to a comment that, what was the guy? There was a Hammond, John Hammond. Remember him? That name? He was the guy who discovered a lot of people back.
Oh, John Hammond. Like, sure. Yeah, sure.
Holiday and Count Basie.
Sure.
So John Hammond heard me play one someplace, somewhere. And he really liked me. He tried to get me to play gigs and at his house private parties, and it was weird because it would be with really mainstream people, and I said, oh man, I don't think I would fit with those guys. But he always liked me, and he made a comment in print somewhere that Bill Pierce, he's like the new Lester Young or something like that. And I said, really? I never thought about that, because I hadn't even really started listening to Lester Young at that point. I didn't. If it was there, it's nothing that came about for me listening to Lester on records. It was before I really started to expand my ideas. But anyway, and James knew that John Hammond had said that. And then, so he had the idea, I think, to make this record similar to the record that Lester made with Buddy Rich and Nat King Cole. And I think that's why that came about.
Mm.
He wanted to, I guess, a more modern version. I don't know. And it was this, I had met Roy a few times, but never to play with him. I just had friends that ended up in his band. So I'd hang out and he'd look at me, yeah, how you doing? And he'd be on his way. I mean, I didn't know him personally. He's from Boston. I knew one of his brothers quite well. And his brother, the preacher, had a church, a big church in Boston, was right around from where I used to live. But I didn't have any real relationship with Roy. And so we did that record, and it was just so great. I was really nervous at first because once I got in the recording studio, I thought to myself, wait a minute, these two guys played with Charlie Parker. And I was like, oh shit, why am I here? Why am I playing with these guys? These guys played with Bird. I mean, I didn't even think about all the other stuff they did. Just the fact that they played with Bird, I was like, oh man. But Hank Jones was so sweet and so gentle and so kind. And Roy, and he and Roy were buddies from way back in the day. They were just talking and cracking jokes and stuff. It was just so easy. I was, still kind of like, well, gosh. And James had said, man, just call tunes. And I'd always say, well, how about no matter what tune? I could have called any goddamn thing, Firebirds, or the 1812 Overture, and Hank Jones would have been able to play it. So no matter what I called Hank, and Hank is kind of an interesting guy. He said, okay, well, we can play it like this. And then he said, oh, we can do it like this. Or we can do it like this. So he could play any kind of way you could imagine any of those standards be played. And I said, well, just make it as simple as possible for me. And, one thing that I'm very proud of, it didn't come to be for a lot of reasons, but Hank asked me to join his band.
Really?
And yeah, but I couldn't. I had just made a commitment to somebody else, and I said I don't want to do that. And I was still kind of shy a little bit about Hank. And it was actually Tony's band, to be honest.
Sure.
And it had just come out and said, look, Tony's looking for a new band. Maybe you can do it. And there's more to it in the background, but that's not to be said. But anyway, I was so proud that Hank Jones actually asked me to join his band. And a friend of mine also was talking me up, a guy named Keith Copeland, was playing with Hank Jones.
Yeah, beautiful drummer.
Yeah, he was my buddy. And he had talked me up too. And Hank said, yeah, I think and then I think the fact that I said I'm doing something else, Hank didn't appreciate that. But he was always, every time he was very nice to me. But yeah, that was a wonderful. And I used to see Roy. I haven't seen him in a while. But I ran into Roy always I went to his brother's funeral, and that was kind of traumatic for me because I knew his brother really well. Nice man, beautiful man. And I ran into Roy at Harvard. They had something, so they invited me to be at this luncheon because I guess they know I had a connection with Roy. I mean, a lot of times I show up and think, well, who do we know in Boston who actually played with any of these guys? Let me see. Oh, Bill Pierce. Call him. So I got a lot of free lunches that way. So I was at Harvard, having lunch with Roy and somebody, and it was like, and he was actually, most of the time he was really cool with me. He's like, yeah, man, how you doing, man? And but he's a Boston guy, and I knew, like I said, I knew one of his brothers, Vinny was his name, Vinny Haynes, and his brother. Everybody in Boston knows his preacher brother, his minister brother, and one of the real significant families in Boston. The Haynes family is a mainstay of the Black community and of Boston in general. So I've been blessed. Good thing I left Nashville, Tennessee to move to Boston. I went to college for 2 years in Nashville. It was not quite the same as Boston, but anyway, but it's a nice city in its own right. There you go. So look, I have got to go. Anything else?
It's okay.
So man, so let me know anything if you ever come to New York or Boston. Let me know you're here.
I will.
If I ever
Thank you.
get to
Yeah, drop me a line if you're in Europe.
let me know. I know I contact you. I got your email
Yeah,
address.
please write. Please
on
write.
my email.
Dr. Jazz.